1934, on the west edge of Wheeler County, Texas, the sky had no softness left in it. It was winter, but the wind still blew like it hated the ground, pushing dry dust down from the hills and through the dry bones of cottonwoods. The land had quit hoping for rain. The dirt was split open in long, aching cracks. And the frost was the sort that didn't sparkle, it bit through coats, through boots, through bone. She stood in the doorway of the old farmhouse with a baby on one hip and three more at her feet, staring out across nothing. No smoke in the chimney across the pasture where the neighbors used to live. No dog barking, just the rasp of wind in the wires and the sound of the baby fussing, tired and hungry and cold. Her name was Alma Greeley, and she had lost her husband 12 days ago. He was buried on the edge of the back field where the fence leaned like an old man with no cane. She hadn't eaten that morning, hadn't eaten the night before. There was half a jar of flour left and nothing in the cellar but spoiled potatoes and a tin of lard she couldn't bring herself to open. She'd spent most of the night rocking the baby by the stove that barely warmed, listening to her middle boy's chest rattle when he breathed. The children didn't complain anymore. They were too tired for that. Even little Jess, who'd always begged for songs at bedtime, had gone quiet. The youngest maid stopped crawling 3 days back. Her legs curled under her like twigs when Alma set her down. Tom, the oldest at 8, tried to carry her when he could, but he was too weak. The others shuffled behind the soles of their socks, worn through to skin. Alma had wrapped them all in whatever she could find, old coats that had belonged to her husband, one of her own dresses torn into strips for warmth. Still, they shivered as she led them out onto the porch. Her eyes drifted to the barn, then to the road that hadn't seen a cart in 4 days. There was no one coming. She knew that. The man from the bank had come by 3 days after the funeral, all slick hair and eyes that didn't meet hers. Told her the house wasn't hers anymore, that she could stay a while longer, but it wasn't hers. Said it like it was a kindness. She'd nodded, then closed the door in his face before she started crying. But she didn't cry now. Her lips were chapped and bleeding, her hands raw and red from carrying water and splitting wood with a hatchet too dull to cut through anything but her will. She wasn't a woman prone to despair, but she was close, closer than she'd ever been. The baby's name was Grace. She made a soft noise and laid her head down on Alma's shoulder, spent from nothing. The weight of her made Alma sway. Tom tried to help his brother down the steps but stumbled. His legs buckled and he sat hard on the wood, eyes dull. No tears. Just that blank, hollow tiredness that didn't belong on a child's face. That was when she saw the rider. At first she thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light in the trees. But it moved, deliberate, a shape against the flat gray of the world, getting closer. She didn't call out, didn't dare, just stood there with her baby slumped against her, waiting for the figure to come into view. The horse was a tall one, strong-legged and broad through the chest. The man who rode him wore an oilskin coat and a felt hat pulled low, and when he reached the edge of her property he slowed, reined the animal in. He didn't speak at first, just looked. His eyes settled on the children. Alma straightened her arm, tightening around Grace. She didn't like being looked at. She didn't like needing help. But the man dismounted. He walked toward them with heavy boots, the kind that sank a little with every step in the frost-covered dust. She could see then he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, his beard rough and unkempt. He had the look of a man who'd been alone a long time and learned to prefer silence. Still, he took off his hat when he reached the steps. "Ma'am," he said, voice quiet like he didn't want to scare the children. She didn't answer, just looked back at him, bracing herself for what he might ask. But he didn't ask anything. Instead, he looked at Tom. "You all right, son?" Tom nodded, then shook his head. The man knelt and his coat creaked. "You look near frozen." Alma swallowed. "We don't need nothing," she said. Her voice came out like sand. The man nodded once. "Reckon I can see that." Then he stood and reached up for Grace. She didn't resist when he took her, holding her like he knew how, like it was something he'd done before. Alma's breath caught. "I've got room in the wagon," he said, nodding toward where he must have left it behind the ridge. "Can get you warm. Get them fed." She looked at her children, at the long flat road, then back at him. She didn't want to say yes, but there was no left in her. "All right," she whispered. He nodded again and didn't smile. Then he bent and lifted the next child. The wagon wasn't far. He'd left it just beyond the ridge, tucked beside a stand of cedar where the wind broke and the ground softened. The horse, a thick-chested roan named Elko, was hitched to the side, tied off with a loose sled, like the man hadn't thought anyone would come near enough to matter. The bed of the wagon was half covered by a canvas tarp stiff with cold, and under it lay a scatter of supplies, blankets, a sack of oats, canned beans, some cured meat wrapped in paper. There were clothes, too. Coats that didn't match, gloves with different hands, a pair of boots that looked too small for a man but too big for a child. He worked without words. Carried the children one by one, Tom last, and set them in the back like something fragile, placing a folded quilt beneath their head. Alma walked behind, silent. She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask where he'd come from. Her body was too cold to ask questions, her mind stretched thin like old cloth pulled across a frame. Still, something inside her held on, cautious and stubborn. He saw it in the way she kept her chin lifted, in how she made sure every child had something covering them before she let herself climb up into the wagon. He handed her a blanket. "Best wrap that baby up tight. Wind's gonna pick up come afternoon." She took it without thanks. Not out of rudeness, but because she didn't have the space for manners yet. She tucked Grace into her chest and rocked her gently, watching the man climb into the front bench and take the reins. The wheels groaned as they started moving. The land rolled past them, slow, wide stretches of nothing, the kind of empty that could make a person feel like they'd fallen out of time. They passed a dead windmill, its blades half torn and creaking in rhythm with the wheels. Beyond it, a silo had collapsed in on itself like a crushed can, its metal ribs catching the gray light. "You from around here?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. He didn't turn, just nodded. "North of Shamrock. Used to be cattle country. Still is if a man's stubborn enough." "What's your name?" "Denton." He didn't offer more. She didn't press. After a while the baby slept. The boys leaned against each other, eyes half-lidded. The warmth inside the canvas, the steady motion of the wagon, the feel of something solid beneath them, it was enough to ease the ache a little, enough to let their breathing slow. Alma stared at the back of Denton's coat. He drove with one gloved hand, the other resting lightly on his knee. His shoulders were broad, not in a showy way, but like they'd been built over years of labor. She wondered how many winters he'd ridden through like this, how many farms he'd seen fall apart, how many women he'd carried from places like hers. "You do this often?" she asked, not quite meaning to. "No," he said. That was it. An hour passed, maybe more. The cold light softened into something close to afternoon. Alma could smell wood smoke in the air before she saw anything, then a line of trees, a sloping rise, and a gate made of split cedar posts appeared on the horizon. Beyond it sat a small ranch house, simple and square, with smoke rising from a metal chimney. Denton didn't say, "We're here." He didn't need to. The children stirred as the wagon came to a stop. Denton climbed down first, tied Elko to a post, then came around to the back and offered his arms. She hesitated. "I can carry them," she said, reaching for Jess. "You don't have to." "I know." But her hands were shaking, and Denton saw it. He said nothing, just took the boy and held the door open with his foot as Alma followed behind with Grace. The house smelled of pine and old wood. The floors creaked and the windows had been covered with thick quilts to keep out the wind. A fire burned low in the hearth, throwing a quiet orange light across the walls. "Kitchen's through there," Denton said. "Water pump out back still works, though it's stiff when it's cold. I'll bring some in." Alma nodded once, set Grace down on a quilt near the fire, and knelt beside her, loosening the baby's wrappings. The warmth made her dizzy. She could hear her own breath in her ears, feel the blood move back into her fingers like needles. Behind her, Denton moved through the house, boots scuffing against floorboards, the door opening, closing, the sound of water sloshing in a pail. The children didn't ask questions. They were too tired to worry. This was a warm room. There was fire and stillness and something like safety, and for the first time in 12 days, Alma let her shoulders fall. She touched the edge of the baby's cheek and felt it warm. A pan clanked in the kitchen. Then the smell of something cooking drifted in, bacon and beans and a kind of fat that coated the air with promise. Alma didn't cry, but her throat swelled. She didn't know what this place was, or what kind of man Denton was, but she knew with the sharp clarity of hunger and heartbreak that he'd given her children warmth when no one else had. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Just for a minute. Subscribe and ride on. There's more dust, more truth, and more stories ahead. That first night passed without words. Denton had set plates out for all of them, quiet and methodical. The children ate slowly at first, cautious as deer, until Jess let out a soft sigh and leaned against the table, crumbs stuck to his cheek. Alma had cut the food into small bites, feeding Grace with her fingers, watching as the other three drifted into sleep against the edges of the warmth. Denton never sat down. He stayed near the stove, leaning against the counter, arms folded, watching but not staring. She knew the kind of men who watched women when they thought no one noticed. He wasn't one of them. His eyes went more often to the children than her, and when he did glance her way, it wasn't hunger or pity. It was something like quiet recognition. After the children were wrapped in quilts on the floor, he brought her a steaming mug, just hot water and dried peppermint leaves. "You ought to sleep," he said. "I will." He hesitated. "You can take the back room. I'll stay by the fire." She nodded, and that was all. She didn't remember falling asleep, only the strange relief of lying down and knowing someone else was listening for the door. In the morning, the house was still. She woke to birdsong, just one bird, thin voiced from the trees beyond the barn. The baby was breathing soft and slow against her ribs, her little fist curled in Alma's collar. For a long while she didn't move, just listened. Then she got up and crept through the house, checking each child with her fingers, counting ribs and brushing hair back from fevered foreheads. The boys were warm. No cough. Their color was better. The stove was still going. She found Denton out near the barn, chopping wood with a hand axe. A soft layer of frost clung to the grass. He didn't look up when she approached. "I need to work," she said simply. He paused. "You don't have to yet." "I do." The axe came down one more time. Then he leaned it against the block. "You ever milk?" She nodded. "Chickens'll need feedin', water troughs frozen. I'll get the kettle hot to thaw it." He didn't say more, just started toward the house. She followed, wrapping her coat tighter. They moved like two people long used to silence. Not uncomfortable, just practical. He showed her the co-op, the feed shed where the milk cow liked to be scratched behind the ears. She set to work without asking questions. Later in the kitchen, she peeled potatoes. He mended a broken hinge. They didn't talk much, but once when she asked where he'd gotten the canned beans, he gave a short answer, traded for 'em out by Groom. "Some fellas clearing out. Didn't want to stay through winter. They leave you this place too." He gave the faintest grin. "No. This Was mine. My daddy's before that. Something about the way he said it made her glance over. You been here long? Born here. Left for a while. Came back. That was all he said. But she caught at the pause before came back, the faint weariness in it. Like whatever made him leave hadn't entirely let go. That night after the children slept, she asked, you got a family? He stared into the fire. Used to. Folks died young. Married once. She left. Took the boy. Alma didn't ask why. The way his voice thickened at boy said enough. She reached to stir the stew, and for a moment the only sound was the wooden spoon tapping the edge of the pot. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He gave a slight nod. Was a long time ago. Don't mean it didn't stay with you. They didn't speak for a long while after that. But something had shifted. Not big. Just enough. The days passed slow, then steadier. The frost stayed late into the morning, then gave way to dry sun. Denton started showing Tom how to carry wood, how to hold a hammer. Alma taught the younger two to sweep to dry herbs. At night, the house filled with the sounds of spoons scraping bowls and soft laughter, the kind that comes when you're too tired to be guarded. He never touched her, never crossed the space between them. But there were moments, her hand brushing his when they passed plates, his coat draped over her shoulders, when the wind blew sharp, that carried something unspoken. She didn't trust easily, but she trusted his silences, and that meant more than words. By the third week, the boys could stand without wobbling. Tom started waking early without being asked. He'd pull on his 2 big boots and meet Denton in the yard, trying to match his stride as they walked to the barn. He wasn't strong yet, but he was proud, and Denton never made him feel small for that. Instead, he taught him things. Small things like the right way to haul a feed sack or how to swing an axe without wasting the blade. Alma watched from the porch some mornings, not smiling exactly, but softer. There was a kind of weight that had lifted from her eyes, though her jaw was still set tight most of the time, like she couldn't afford to let her guard drop too far. She had begun to change, too. In the first days, she moved like a shadow in the house, quiet, braced for something to go wrong. But now she spoke more, asked what needed doing. She helped patch the chicken wire where coyotes had torn through. She mended Denton's shirts with a needle so fine you could hardly see the seam. The rough edge of her grief was still there, but it had reshaped itself into something useful. Late one afternoon, they were standing near the corral. Denton had just finished showing Tom how to loop a lead rope. Alma leaned against the fence, arms crossed. That boy of mine, she said, he's been quiet since before his daddy died. But you got him looking up again? Denton adjusted the brim of his hat. Ain't doing much. You are. Just not loud about it. He gave a small grunt, but there was a twitch at the corner of his mouth. He's a good kid. They all are. They just got hollowed out. Wasn't just death. It was what came after. He nodded. She turned her face into the wind. You lose things slow and then all at once? They stood like that for a while, no talk, just the sound of a horse kicking at a stall and the wind whispering through the fence rails. Finally, she said, I was married 13 years. He was good to us, but he didn't prepare for the lean times. Thought they'd always pass. Denton's voice was low. They usually do, but not always in time. Alma turned and looked at him. What about you? What did you want to be before all this? He blinked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Didn't think about it much. Grew up working then. I married young. Thought maybe I'd have more cattle. Teach my boy how to run the place. You still could, she said. Boy's in Kansas now. Don't reckon I'll see him again. Something in the way he said it shut the air down for a second. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she said, maybe that's why you stopped that wagon. Maybe you needed someone to take care of. He looked over at her then. Really look. His eyes were gray pale like weathered stone. You think that's what I'm doing? No, she said after a beat. I think you were just tired of letting things fall apart. Neither of them spoke after that. But something was understood. Later inside, she found a book tucked on the shelf by the window, a cowboy's pocket Bible. She flipped it open and found a name written in a boy's uneven scrawl on the first page, James D. Rourke, aged 9. She closed the book and set it back. That night, as the fire burned down low and the children slept bundled together like a litter of fox pups, Denton stood by the window looking out into the dark. Alma stood beside him, not touching, just close enough to feel that he didn't want to be alone. Storm's coming, he said. She looked out too. The sky was heavy, waiting. I can feel it in my bones, he added, voice low. I can feel it too. The storm came 3 days later, rolled in before dawn, loud and sudden with sleet that pounded the windows and turned the world outside to white noise. The roof groaned under the weight of it. Trees leaned and creaked in the wind. For a long while, Alma just sat up in the dark, holding Grace close and listening to the storm batter the house, like it had a score to settle. By morning, the fire had nearly died and the air inside had gone sharp with cold. Denton had been up before anyone, coaxing the stove back to life, stuffing kindling in with his bare hands red and cracked from splitting wood the night before. Alma came into the kitchen wrapped in an old army coat he'd given her 2 weeks back. You should let me take that shift, she said, nodding toward the stove. You were sleeping. Barely. He didn't look up from the flame. Still better than nothing. She knelt beside him to help feed in the thicker logs. Their hands brushed once over the same piece of cedar, and neither of them pulled away right off. When the fire caught again, they stood close, the heat rising between them. He looked at her long and unhurried. You ever think about leaving Texas? No, she said. Texas is cruel, but it's home. He nodded. Me too. The children stirred then, and the moment passed. The storm lasted 2 days. It knocked the fence down along the north side, froze the pump solid, and scattered the last of the feed sacks Denton had stored under the lean-to. They worked through it side by side, pulling tarps over the co-op hammering boards back into place, slipping and cursing and laughing once, just once, when Alma fell into a drift and came up swearing with snow in her collar. That night, after the children had gone to sleep early with hot broth in their bellies, Alma sat near the fire, sewing a tear in Tom's coat. Denton was across from her, quiet, staring into the flame. I don't think I said thank you, she said after a while. He didn't answer right away. Then you don't owe me that. Doesn't mean I shouldn't say it. He shifted in his chair. You saved them, not me. You carried them. He looked over. You would have carried them farther. She set the coat down in her lap, stared into the fire for a long breath. I think I was nearly gone before you showed up. I knew that look, he said. I'd seen it once. In the mirror. Neither of them moved for a while. The fire cracked. Somewhere outside, ice slid from the roof in a heavy thump. Then she said, when the snow clears, what happened? Denton looked at her slowly. What do you want to happen? Alma opened her mouth to answer, then shut it again. He stood and walked to the small cabinet where he kept the bottle, poured 2 fingers into a chipped enamel cup, and handed it to her. I used to think I'd die on this land, he said, leaning against the wall. Now I'm not sure what I want. Just know it feels different with you here. She held the cup in both hands. Didn't drink. I've got nothing to offer you but a heart that's been broken 6 ways and stitched back wrong. I'm not looking for perfect, he said. Just true. She met his eyes. Slowly, carefully. It scares me. Me too. And that was the first time they said anything that might resemble love. Not with the word itself, but with everything that surrounded it, honesty, quiet, and the kind of respect that only comes from seeing another person at their weakest and staying anyway. But nothing good lasts without being tested. Word came 2 days later in the form of a man on horseback. A rider from town bundled against the cold with a letter in his pocket and a warning on his tongue. State wants the land, he said, standing in the yard with his gloves off and a map folded under his arm. They're making offers. Not much, but enough to tempt a man who's been holding on too long. Denton didn't answer, just stared at the paper. Alma stepped forward. You selling? The rider looked between them, then back at Denton. It's your choice. Just figured you ought to know. He rode off with his shoulders hunched against the wind. Alma watched Denton carefully. You thinking about it, she asked. He nodded once. I was, before you got here. And now? He didn't answer, just went back inside. That night, he didn't sit near the fire, and she didn't press him. But the warmth between them had dimmed. Not gone. Just distant. They spoke less in the days that followed. Not out of anger, more like caution. Denton kept working sunup to sundown, fixing the fence, hauling in the last of the wood, checking the roof for leaks. Alma cooked and taught the boys their letters at the kitchen table, mending and cleaning and keeping the home going, as if it might slip from her hands if she rested too long. But each night, as they sat across from each other near the fire, the space between them filled with questions neither of them had the right words for. The children noticed. Kids always do. Tom asked her one morning while she was folding rags, "Are we staying here?" Alma didn't look up. For now. But after, she smoothed a corner that didn't need smoothing. That's up to Mr. Denton. Tom frowned. He wants us here. I think so. She said nothing. Later that same day, Denton stood by the barn watching the wind pull hard across the open land. Alma came out to check the wash and saw him standing there, shoulders drawn in. She walked up beside him. I don't want to be something that makes your life harder, she said. No preamble. You're not. You've got a chance to sell this place. Start over. Do something easier. He shook his head, but she kept going. You took us in when we had nothing. I won't be the reason you lose anything. He turned to face her then. His voice was low and steady. Don't you understand by now I was already losing before you came? Every year a little more. You think this land matters more than people. Alma didn't answer. He stepped closer. You want to go, I won't stop you. But if you're staying because you think I'm doing you a favor, don't. I want you here. He paused, then added quieter, I need you here. Her throat tightened. I don't know how to do this again. I don't either. But I'd rather try with you than not at all. The wind tugged her dress sideways. The line of the hills was silver with melting snow. Alma reached up and touched the side of his face, rough with stubble and cold from the air. I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, eyes not leaving hers. Then she leaned into his chest and he held her like she belonged there. They didn't talk much about it after that. But something settled between them. A stillness. A trust. They built the rest of the winter around it. Tom asked if he could help raise a calf in the spring. Jess took to following Denton around the barn, mimicking his walk. Grace said her first real word, warm, while reaching toward the stove one morning. Denton laughed when he heard it, and Alma laughed too, and the sound filled the room like sunlight through glass. In March, a neighbor came riding by with a sack of seed and a story about how the state had backed off the land grab for now. They figured most of us wouldn't last the winter, he said with a crooked smile. Guess we surprised 'em. Denton handed him a coffee and didn't say much. But that night, after the children had gone to sleep, he brought out a small velvet box from the drawer of the old desk. He didn't get down on one knee, didn't make a speech, just opened it right there on the kitchen table. Inside was a plain silver ring. Alma stared at it for a long time. Her eyes went damp, but she didn't cry. "You sure?" she asked. "I've never been more." She picked it up, turned it once in her fingers. Then she slipped it on and said, "All right." They married under the cottonwood near the barn. Just them, the children, and the wind. Tom held a Bible Denton had carried for years. Grace wore a ribbon in her hair. Jess dropped a handful of wildflowers and didn't notice when they fell crooked. There was no preacher, no crowd, just two people who'd nearly lost everything saying yes to whatever came next. Later, Alma pressed her hand to the belly beneath her apron. Not yet showing, but she knew. Life again. Starting quiet, but strong. Spring came late that year. The last frost hung on longer than usual, curling the edges of the early shoots and keeping the animals restless in their stalls. But it came all the same, slow and deliberate, like someone waking after a long illness. The land which had once looked dead to Alma began to soften beneath her boots. Tiny green things pushed through the cracks. The cottonwoods turned pale gold, then green again. Even the wind, which had never stopped blowing, changed its voice, less sharp now, more like a song you could hum along to if you'd heard it enough time. They kept busy. The boys were always moving, fixing, hauling, feeding. Denton built a second chicken coop with Tom at his side. Jess followed close behind with a bent nail and a hammer far too big for his hands. Grace could walk now, wobbly and proud. She chased the barn cat with a laugh that made Alma stop whatever she was doing just to listen. Every morning started the same. Denton would rise first, stoke the fire, start the coffee. Alma would meet him in the kitchen, barefoot, hair still loose. He'd pass her a mug without speaking, and they'd stand at the window and watch the world get brighter. Not rushed. Not in a hurry to fix or solve anything. Just there. Together. The baby came in August. A boy. Born in the bedroom Denton had once kept shut like a wound. Alma held him in her arms with her hair damp from sweat and her eyes wide with something between relief and wonder. Denton sat beside her on the edge of the bed, both hands on the baby's blanket, his head bowed low. "I never thought," he whispered. "Not again." Alma smiled, tired and sure. "You're not the only one who got a second chance." They named him Samuel after her grandfather, a quiet man who'd taught her how to read the sky. That fall they rebuilt the fence along the east line. Neighbors came to help folks who'd once gone quiet when they saw the widow pass through town, now stopping to bring extra lumber and a bottle of something strong for the cold evenings. Denton took it in stride. Alma didn't say much, but she watched. She saw how the children no longer flinched at loud voices, how they didn't cling to her when someone new came by, how they laughed now without looking around first to make sure it was safe. One morning, while hanging laundry behind the house, she turned and caught sight of them, Tom teaching Jess how to tie a proper knot, Grace chasing chickens with her hair in a wild tangle, and Denton sitting on the porch with the baby asleep against his chest. The wind kicked up a little, catching the edge of a sheet, snapping it like a sail. She closed her eyes and let it pass over her. It was still Texas. Still hard. Still untrustworthy. But she was no longer waiting for the next bad thing. She was building something. Something that might last. They carved a name into the gate, Greeley Rourke Ranch. Tom had done the burning by hand, the letters rough and too large. But Alma ran her fingers across the wood every time she passed, like it mattered more that it had been done with care than if it had been done perfect. They didn't have much, but they had that name. They had each other. And for once, that was more than enough. "Don't turn back now," Subscribe and follow the trail deeper into the West.